Adanna had always been the perfect wife, loving, loyal, and devoted to her husband, Obinna. She treated his mother, Mama Nkechi, like her own, always showing respect and care. She never imagined that behind Mama Nkechi's kind smile was a heart full of jealousy and manipulation. Adanna believed that love and kindness could win anyone over, so she tried her best to be a good wife and daughter-in-law. Tonight was supposed to be special. She had spent hours in the kitchen, preparing Obinna's favorite meal. She had exciting news to share with him and couldn't wait to see his reaction. She set the table beautifully, hoping this dinner would bring them closer as a family. As Adanna served the food, Mama Nkechi leaned close to Obinna and whispered something in his ear. Instantly, Obinna's expression changed. His face darkened, his jaw tightened, and his hands clenched into fists. Adanna noticed his sudden change in mood, but didn't understand why. She looked at him, confused, but before she could ask what was wrong, Obinna did something that shocked her to the core. Without a word, Obinna raised his hand and slapped her across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the room, and everything went silent. Adanna staggered back, holding her cheek, too stunned to speak. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked at her husband in disbelief. This was the man she had loved and cared for, the man she had done everything for, and he had just hit her without even asking for an explanation. "So this is who you really are," Obinna hissed, his eyes filled with anger. "How dare you insult my mother like that?" Adanna's mind raced. What was he talking about? What had she done? She turned to Mama Nkechi, who was now dabbing fake tears from her eyes. "She told me to get out of my son's house," Mama Nkechi sobbed. "She wants to replace me," Adanna gasped. That was a lie. She would never say such a thing. But Obinna didn't even hesitate to believe his mother's words. Before Adanna could defend herself, Obinna's phone rang. He picked it up and played a voice message. "I will never let your mother destroy our home. I love and respect her." It was Adanna's voice. The message had been recorded earlier when she spoke to a friend about trying to make peace with Mama Nkechi. Obinna's face went pale. His hands trembled. The truth hit him like a storm. His mother had lied. He had hurt his wife for no reason. Obinna turned to Mama Nkechi, his heart pounding. "You lied to me," he whispered, realization sinking in. But it was too late. Adanna wiped her tears, stood tall, and looked him straight in the eyes. "You didn't even ask me before raising your hand," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You're not my husband. You're just your mother's puppet." She took off her wedding ring, placed it on the table, picked up her bag, and walked out of the house. Obinna ran after her, begging for forgiveness, but Adanna didn't stop. She had given him her love, her trust, and her heart, and he had broken it all in one moment. Mama Nkechi, who once looked so confident, now sat frozen, realizing that she had destroyed her own son's happiness. She had won the battle, but lost the war. Days turned into weeks, and Obinna's life fell apart. Without Adanna, his business crumbled, his home felt empty, and he finally saw his mother for who she really was. Meanwhile, Adanna focused on rebuilding her life. She healed, grew stronger, and found someone who truly respected and valued her. She thrived without him. Obinna watched from afar, filled with regret. He had lost the best thing he ever had, all because he trusted a lie. In the end, the lesson was clear. A man who does not think for himself will lose everything, and a woman who knows her worth will never beg to be loved. Adanna walked away, never looking back, while Obinna was left drowning in his regrets. Adanna smiled as she placed Obinna's favorite dish on the table, eager to see his reaction. Tonight was special. She had put her heart into this meal, wanting to make her husband happy. She was also excited to share some wonderful news with him. She had no idea that this night, meant to bring them closer, would tear everything apart. As she reached for a glass to pour him a drink, Mama Nkechi leaned in close to Obinna and whispered something in his ear. It was so soft, so quiet, that Adanna couldn't hear the words. But she saw the change in Obinna immediately. His face twisted into something dark and unreadable. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled into fists on the table. The warmth in his eyes disappeared in an instant, replaced by something cold and angry. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with unspoken words. Adanna felt her chest tighten. She didn't understand what had just happened. One moment, everything was fine. The next, it felt like a storm was about to hit. She looked at Obinna, confused. "Darling, is something wrong?" she asked gently, her voice filled with concern. Obinna didn't answer. He only glared at her, his breathing heavy. The silence stretched, making Adanna's heart pound. Then before she could say another word, his hand shot out. The slap came so fast, so unexpected, that she didn't even have time to react. The sharp sound of his palm meeting her cheek echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. Adanna stumbled back, gasping. A burning pain spread across her face. Her hand flew to her cheek, her fingers trembling against the sting. She felt dizzy, as if the world had just been turned upside down. For a moment, there was nothing, just the ringing in her ears, the throbbing in her face, and the crushing weight of shock in her chest. She looked at Obinna, searching for an answer in his eyes, but all she saw was rage. "So this is who you really are," he spat, his voice cold and full of disgust. "How dare you insult my mother like that?" Adanna's breath caught in her throat. What was he talking about? She hadn't done anything. She turned to Mama Nkechi, desperate for clarity, but the older woman only sat there, wiping away fake tears with a sly smile hidden beneath her sorrowful mask. "I didn't do anything," Adanna choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands trembled as she held onto the chair for support. Mama Nkechi sniffled dramatically. "She told me to get out of my son's house," she sobbed. "She said I don't belong here anymore, that she wants me gone so she can have you all to herself." Adanna's mouth fell open in shock. Her heart stopped. That was a lie, a terrible, cruel lie. She turned back to Obinna, shaking her head. "I would never—" "Enough!" Obinna's voice thundered through the room, making her flinch. "I heard enough." His hands were still clenched into fists, his body rigid with fury. He wasn't even willing to listen. He had already made up his mind. Tears welled up in Adanna's eyes. This was the man she loved, the man she had sacrificed so much for. And now, because of one whispered lie, he saw her as an enemy. Then, suddenly, the phone in Obinna's pocket buzzed. He grabbed it, still fuming, and pressed play on a voice message. Adanna's voice filled the air. "I will never let your mother destroy our home. I love and respect her." The room fell into a heavy silence. Obinna's anger drained from his face. His hands loosened. His skin went pale. The realization hit him like a hammer. Mama Nkechi's lie had just been exposed. Obinna looked from his phone to his mother, his lips slightly parted in shock. "You lied to me," he whispered, his voice hollow. Mama Nkechi opened her mouth, scrambling for an excuse, but no words came. The guilt was written all over her face. Adanna stood there, still holding her cheek, her heart shattered. The truth was out, but it didn't matter anymore. Slowly, she wiped her tears and straightened her shoulders. "You didn't even ask me," she said, her voice steady but filled with pain. "You didn't even think before raising your hand against me. You're not my husband. You're just your mother's puppet." She reached for her handbag, her fingers still shaking but determined. She slid off her wedding ring, placed it gently on the table, and turned away. "Adanna, wait," Obinna stammered, reaching out for her. I made a mistake." But she didn't stop. She didn't turn back. She walked to the door, her head held high, her heart breaking but her spirit unshaken. Mama Nkechi, who had once looked so confident, now sat frozen, realizing the damage she had caused. She had won the battle, but lost the war. Obinna watched as the woman he loved walked out of his life. He wanted to call her name, to beg for another chance. But deep down, he knew he had lost her forever. Days turned into weeks, and his life crumbled. Without Adanna, everything fell apart. His business suffered. His home felt empty. His heart felt heavy. The air in the dining room grew thick, suffocating, heavy with unspoken tension. Just moments ago, the scent of Adanna's carefully prepared meal had filled the space, a symbol of love, of effort, of a home she had worked so hard to build. Now, everything had changed in an instant, without warning, without a single question. Obinna's hand flew across her face. The sound of the slap cracked through the room like thunder, shattering the warmth, the trust, everything. Adanna gasped, stumbling backward, her hand flying to her burning cheek. For a moment, the world spun. The pain wasn't just physical, it was deeper, sharper, cutting straight through her heart. She blinked, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Her husband, her Obinna, had hit her. The same man who had once held her close, who had promised to protect her, had just raised his hand against her without hesitation. Her breath came in shallow gasps as her eyes lifted to meet his. But the man she had loved was gone. In his place stood a stranger, eyes burning with blind rage, fists clenched, his chest rising and falling in heavy breaths. "So this is who you really are," he hissed, his voice dripping with disgust. Adanna's heart pounded violently against her ribs. "Obinna, what are you talking about?" Her voice trembled, the sting on her cheek nothing compared to the agony tearing through her chest. "How dare you insult my mother like that?" He spat, his words sharp as knives. Her lips parted, but no words came. Insult his mother? When? How? She turned her gaze toward Mama Nkechi, and there she was, sitting back with a satisfied smirk, her eyes glistening with false tears. Adanna's stomach twisted. This was her doing. Mama Nkechi had whispered something to Obinna, and that whisper had been enough to turn him against her. Adanna's voice was barely above a whisper. Don't lie to me!" Obinna's roar made her flinch. His hand twitched as if he might strike again, and for the first time she felt afraid of the man she once trusted with her life. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced them back. She would not cry, not in front of them. She looked at Mama Nkechi again, searching for a shred of humanity, for any sign that this was a misunderstanding. But all she saw was cold satisfaction. Mama Nkechi had won. Adanna felt the walls closing in. She had spent years proving her love for Obinna, proving her loyalty, respecting his mother like her own, and yet all it took was a whisper, a single whisper, to destroy everything. The pain in her cheek faded into the background as a new kind of pain settled deep inside her, a pain that whispered a truth she wasn't ready to face. Obinna never even asked for her side of the story. He had judged her guilty without a trial, and that meant he had never truly trusted her. A slow, cold realization crept into her bones. This wasn't just about one slap. This was the moment that changed everything. Adanna's heart pounded as she stared at Obinna, her cheeks still burning from the slap. His words cut through her like a blade, cold and unforgiving. "So this is who you really are," he hissed, his voice laced with betrayal. Adanna's lips trembled. "Obinna, what are you talking about?" Obinna's nostrils flared, his fists clenched at his sides. "How dare you insult my mother like that?" His voice was sharp, dripping with rage. Adanna's mind raced. Insult? What insult? She had done nothing. Just moments ago she had been setting the table, excited to share good news with the man she loved. Now, everything was unraveling, spiraling into a nightmare she didn't understand. Her eyes darted to Mama Nkechi, searching for answers. But the older woman sat back, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a soft, pitiful sigh escaping her lips. And then she smirked. It was quick, just a flicker, but Adanna saw it. A chill crawled up her spine. Mama Nkechi wasn't shocked. She wasn't confused. She was satisfied. Adanna's breath hitched. A realization slithered into her mind, tightening around her like a noose. This wasn't an accident. This was planned. Obinna had always been the kind of man who listened to his mother without question. He trusted her completely, and Mama Nkechi knew it. She had used that trust like a weapon against her. Adanna's hands curled into fists. "I never insulted your mother," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I would never do that." Mama Nkechi gasped, placing a hand over her chest as if she were wounded. "So now you're calling me a liar?" Her voice trembled, laced with false hurt. "After everything I've done for you? After I welcomed you into my son's home?" Obinna's jaw tightened. "Enough!" he snapped at Adanna. "I don't want to hear your excuses." Excuses? Adanna's stomach twisted. He didn't even ask. He didn't pause, didn't question, didn't give her a chance to explain. The man who had promised to love her, protect her, stand by her side, he had turned against her in an instant, because of a whisper. The betrayal hit harder than the slap. Adanna felt something inside her crack, something deep and raw. She had spent years proving herself to this family, loving Obinna with everything she had, respecting Mama Nkechi like her own mother, and this was what she got in return. She swallowed back the lump in her throat. "Obinna," she tried again, her voice softer, pleading. "Please, think. Why would I say such a thing? What would I gain?" Obinna hesitated, just for a moment. A shadow of doubt flickered across his face. But before he could even process it, Mama Nkechi let out a dramatic sniffle. "I told you, my son," she murmured. "This woman, she only pretended to love us. But in her heart she wants me gone." Obinna's hesitation vanished. His expression hardened once more. Adanna clenched her jaw. She's manipulating him, and he doesn't even see it. The pain in her chest twisted into something else. Something bitter. Resentment. She had tolerated Mama Nkechi's passive-aggressive comments. She had ignored the little jabs, the subtle ways the older woman made her feel like she would never be good enough. But this was war. Adanna straightened, wiping the tears from her eyes. I see now, she said quietly. This was never about me doing anything wrong. It was about you finding a way to push me out. Mama Nkechi's eyes narrowed slightly. You've never wanted me here, Adanna continued. No matter how much I loved your son, no matter how much I tried to please you. Her voice wavered, but she forced herself to stay strong. And the worst part? I knew it. I knew you'd never accept me, but I still tried. She turned back to Adanna, searching for even a shred of the man she had fallen in love with. And you let her do this. Adanna opened his mouth, but no words came out. Adanna shook her head. You were supposed to be my husband, my partner, but the moment she whispered in your ear, you turned on me. You didn't ask. You didn't think. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. You just hit me. Adanna's shoulders tensed. A flicker of something, guilt, crossed his face. Good, but it wasn't enough. Adanna's heart ached, but she refused to let it break. Not for a man who didn't even give her a chance. You made your choice tonight, Adanna. She lifted her chin, her voice steady. And so have I. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away. Mama Nkechi sat still, her smirk faltering just slightly. She had won this round, but something in Adanna's voice told her this wasn't over. And Adanna, he stood there, watching his wife walk away, his fists still clenched, his anger still burning. But deep inside, something else started to creep in. Doubt. And the horrifying feeling that maybe, just maybe, he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Adanna's hands trembled as she held her stinging cheek, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. The betrayal, the humiliation, the sheer disbelief, it all crashed down on her like a storm, threatening to drown her. I didn't do anything, she pleaded, her voice shaking, her eyes searching Adanna's for even a flicker of love, of trust, of the man she had married. But there was nothing, only anger, only blind, seething rage. And standing beside him, playing the role of the wounded victim, was Mama Nkechi. The older woman let out a shuddering breath, as if barely holding back sobs. She wiped an invisible tear from her cheek and whispered, She told me to get out of my son's house. She said I was no longer needed here. She wants to replace me. Adanna's entire body stiffened. His knuckles turned white. His breathing grew heavy, sharp. His mother's words dripped like poison into his ears, seeping into his soul. He saw red. Adanna's breath caught in her throat as she watched the shift in his face, the way his rage deepened, the way his hands clenched at his sides. This wasn't real. This couldn't be happening. Mama Nkechi was lying, but Adanna, her husband, the man she had built a life with, believed every word. Adanna's legs felt weak beneath her, but she forced herself to stand tall. Adanna, she whispered, her voice laced with desperation. You know I would never say something like that. I love and respect your mother. Why would I ever? Liar! Adanna's voice boomed through the room, sharp as a blade. Adanna flinched. His eyes, once filled with love for her, now burned with fury. You have been pretending all this time, he spat, smiling in her face while waiting for the right moment to drive her out of my life. Adanna's breath came in short gasps. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. I did no such thing, she insisted, her voice breaking. Mama Nkechi, why are you lying? Mama Nkechi gasped, pressing a hand to her chest, as if Adanna had just struck her. I am lying, she whispered, her voice trembling with fake pain. After all I've done for you, I treated you like my own daughter. She let out a dramatic sob, shaking her head. I never thought I would see the day when my own son's wife would turn against me. Adanna stared in horror. She had seen manipulation before, but never like this. Never so perfectly executed, so masterfully delivered. And Adanna was falling for every word. Adanna's hands curled into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had been nothing but kind to this woman, patient, loving. She had ignored the little insults, the passive-aggressive remarks, the endless tests of loyalty. And this was what she got in return. She turned back to Adanna, her voice steadier this time. If I really said those words, prove it, she challenged. Ask for proof before you condemn me. Adanna's eyes flickered for a moment. Doubt. It was small, but it was there. Mama Nkechi saw it too, and she acted fast. You want proof? She sniffled, shaking her head as if the request alone was an insult. After everything, after I raised you, after I sacrificed for you, you want proof before you believe me? Adanna hesitated. Adanna watched as his mother's words wrapped around his mind like chains, dragging him deeper under her control. "She is lying to you," Adanna said, her voice firm now, "and deep down, you know it." Obina's face twisted with conflict, his emotions warring inside him. But Mama Nkechi knew exactly how to tip the scales. She let out a deep, shaky sigh and murmured, just loud enough for him to hear, "You are not the son I raised." Silence. The air in the room grew thick, suffocating. Obina's hands trembled, and then, just like that, the doubt was gone. His eyes hardened again, his jaw clenching. He turned back to Adanna, his decision made. "You disgust me," he muttered. The words sliced through Adanna like a dagger, deeper than any slap ever could. She felt the tears rising, burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She refused to break in front of them. Adanna swallowed the pain, straightened her shoulders, and met Obina's gaze head on. "One day," she said, her voice quiet but steady, "you will realize the truth." She turned to Mama Nkechi, who was now watching her with a smug expression, the smirk barely hidden behind her fake tears. Adanna's lips curled into a sad smile. "And when that day comes," she whispered, "it will be too late." She turned on her heel and walked out, her heart hammering in her chest. Obina didn't call her back. Mama Nkechi didn't drop the act. But the moment the door shut behind her, an eerie silence fell over the room, and for the first time, Obina felt something shift. A strange, unsettling feeling gnawed at the edges of his anger, a whisper of doubt, a tiny voice in his head that asked, what if she was telling the truth? He shook the thought away. No, his mother wouldn't lie to him. She wouldn't, right? The air in the room was thick with tension, suffocating and heavy. Adanna was gone, her absence louder than any argument she could have made. Mama Nkechi sat back, her lips curled in satisfaction, watching Obina as he fumed, his fist still clenched from the confrontation. Then, suddenly, his phone rang. The sharp sound shattered the silence, making Obina flinch. His heart pounded in his chest, his anger still simmering, but something about the timing felt off. He hesitated before reaching for the phone, his fingers feeling strangely numb as he accepted the call. And then, his world came crashing down. A voice message played, loud and clear, echoing through the room. "I will never let your mother destroy our home. I love and respect her." Adanna's voice, soft, sincere, full of love. Obina's breath caught in his throat. He felt the blood drain from his face, his entire body going cold. The phone trembled in his grip as the realization struck him like a lightning bolt. She had never said those words. She had never disrespected his mother. She had been innocent, and he had slapped her. His heart pounded against his ribs as the weight of his actions crushed him. He felt dizzy, lightheaded, as if the very ground beneath him had shifted. His mother had lied. Mama Nkechi had lied. Slowly, he turned to look at her. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, she wasn't crying. She wasn't heartbroken. She wasn't even surprised. No, Mama Nkechi was stiff, her expression frozen, her eyes darting toward his phone in panic. Caught. Obina saw it. She knew. She knew the truth was out, and she was scrambling to figure out her next move. A sick feeling churned in his stomach as he pieced it all together. The manipulations, the false tears, the expertly planted doubts. The woman he had trusted more than anyone had used him, played on his love, turned him against his own wife, and he had fallen for it. Shame washed over him like a tidal wave, followed by horror. What had he done? He had raised his hand against Adanna, his wife, the woman who had loved him, stood by him, respected him, even when his mother made it difficult. He had let a lie turn him into a monster. His hands shook as he ran them over his face. He felt sick. "Mama!" His voice was barely a whisper, hoarse and strained. "You lied to me." Mama Nkechi straightened, quickly masking her fear with offense. "What are you saying? That girl is manipulating you. That recording, how do you know she didn't plan it?" But her voice lacked its usual confidence. It wavered, and for the first time, Obina heard it. He saw it. The truth was undeniable. His stomach twisted as guilt crashed into him, overwhelming, suffocating. He had lost Adanna, and he had no one to blame but himself. He pushed himself to his feet, his movements slow, heavy. "I need to find her," he muttered, his mind racing. "I have to fix this." Fix what? Mama Nkechi's voice was sharp now, laced with desperation. "That girl doesn't deserve you. She was trying to take you away from me, Obina. Everything I did was for your own good. Obinna turned to face her fully, and for the first time in his life, he saw her not as his mother, not as the woman who raised him, but as someone who had just destroyed his marriage with a single lie. No, Mama, he said, his voice low and broken. Everything you did was for yourself. Mama Nkechi's face twisted in anger. You're choosing her over your own mother. Obinna let out a bitter, humorless laugh. I should have chosen her from the start. He grabbed his car keys and rushed toward the door, his heart hammering with urgency. He needed to find Adanna. He needed to beg. But deep down, a terrifying thought whispered in his mind. What if it was already too late? Obinna stood frozen, his mind spiraling into chaos. The truth had shattered everything. The phone in his hand felt unbearably heavy, its screen still glowing from the voice message that had exposed the lie. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as he replayed the words in his head. I will never let your mother destroy our home. I love and respect her. Adanna had never tried to push his mother out. She had never disrespected her. She had loved Mama Nkechi, despite everything. And yet, he had slapped her, his wife, his partner, the woman who had loved him with every piece of her heart. His hands trembled as he stared at them, remembering the way she had staggered back, holding her cheek, eyes wide with shock and pain. The moment replayed in his mind like a nightmare, one he could never take back. The woman who had stood by him, the woman who had fought for their love, the woman who had never given him a reason to doubt her, and he had hurt her. His stomach twisted with a deep, sickening guilt. He felt like he was drowning, like the walls were closing in. His heartbeat was loud in his ears, deafening. His entire body went cold. Mama Nkechi shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in him. Obinna, don't tell me you're believing that girl over your own mother. Her voice was sharp, defensive, but there was something else. Fear. For the first time, he saw through her, through the fake tears, the manipulations, the control she had wielded over him for years. She wasn't the loving, selfless mother she pretended to be. She had wanted Adanna gone. She had lied to break them apart. And he had let her, his hands clenched into fists. You lied to me, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Mama Nkechi scoffed, shaking her head. I did what I had to do. That girl was changing you, making you forget where you come from. Obinna felt a fresh wave of disgust roll over him. She wasn't changing me, Mama. She was loving me. She was helping me grow. His voice cracked, the weight of his mistake pressing down on him. Mama Nkechi's face darkened. And now you're turning against me. Your own mother. Obinna let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. No, Mama. You turned me against my own wife. The words felt like knives as they left his mouth, cutting deep into the air between them. He turned away from her, pacing the room as the horrifying realization sank in. He had destroyed his own marriage. Adanna was gone, and he had no idea if she would ever forgive him. Panic surged through him. He had to fix this. He had to find her, to beg for her forgiveness. His feet moved on their own, rushing toward the door, but Mama Nkechi's voice stopped him in his tracks. She won't take you back, Obinna. Her voice was calm now, calculating. You hit her. You chose me over her. You humiliated her. Her words sliced through him like a blade, each one deepening the wound that was already bleeding inside him. What if she was right? What if Adanna never forgave him? What if he had lost her forever? His throat tightened, his vision blurring with emotions he had never felt so strongly before. Regret, guilt, fear. He turned back to Mama Nkechi, his eyes burning. You wanted me to lose her, didn't you? His voice was laced with pain, but beneath it, there was something else. Rage. Mama Nkechi's silence was all the confirmation he needed. Obinna felt his heart break all over again. The mother he had always trusted, the woman he had always defended, the person he had believed would never betray him. She had done this, and he had been too blind to see it. Without another word, he turned and rushed out of the house, his heart pounding with a single desperate thought. I have to find Adanna. But deep inside, fear whispered a terrifying possibility. What if I'm already too late? The room was silent, thick with tension so heavy it was suffocating. The air still carried the sting of betrayal, of pain that cut deeper than any wound. Adanna stood motionless, her cheek still burning from the slap that had shattered everything she thought she knew. But as the silence stretched, something inside her shifted. The shock faded. The tears that had welled up in her eyes no longer fell freely. Instead, A cold, piercing clarity settled over her. She had spent years loving this man, giving him every part of herself, trusting him to protect her. But in the moment when she needed his trust the most, he had believed a lie. He had struck her without hesitation, without even asking her for the truth. Her lips trembled, but not from sadness. No, this was something else. A slow, growing rage. A realization that made her heart beat steady, her spine straighten. Ogbonna stood frozen across from her, his hands shaking, his eyes wide with regret. "Adanna!" His voice was hoarse, desperate. She held up her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. The look in her eyes made his breath catch in his throat. "No," she said, her voice cold, steady. "You don't get to speak." Ogbonna flinched. He had never heard her sound like this before. There was no pleading in her voice, no heartbreak, just finality. Adanna took a slow step forward, her gaze locked onto his. "You didn't even ask me." The words were soft, but they cut like a knife. "You looked me in the eyes and hit me like I was nothing." Ogbonna opened his mouth, but no words came out. She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You're not my husband, Ogbonna. You're just your mother's puppet." Mama Nkechi's eyes widened, her mouth opening in shock. "You ungrateful—" Adanna turned sharply, cutting her off with a single look. A look filled with all the years of patience, of respect, of love she had given this woman, only to be repaid with deceit. "You wanted to break us apart," Adanna said, tilting her head slightly. "You wanted to turn him against me." A slow smile, one that held no warmth, crossed her lips. "Congratulations, you won." Mama Nkechi blinked, suddenly uncertain. Adanna turned back to Ogbonna. His eyes were glassy, filled with the weight of what he had done. He took a hesitant step toward her. "Please, don't do this." Adanna inhaled sharply, feeling the weight of her next action deep in her bones. Slowly, she reached for her left hand, her fingers wrapping around the simple gold band that had once meant everything to her. She slid it off. The silence that followed was deafening. Ogbonna's breath hitched, his entire body stiffening as she placed the ring on the table between them. "I'm done," she whispered. A shudder ran through Ogbonna, his hands twitching as if he wanted to grab the ring, grab her, grab onto anything that could stop this from happening. "No, no, Adanna, please." She bent down, picked up her bag, and adjusted the strap over her shoulder. It was the simplest action in the world, but to Ogbonna, it felt like the ground beneath him was splitting open. Adanna turned toward the door, her heart steady, her mind clearer than it had ever been. Mama Nkechi's voice was sharp, filled with panic. "Where do you think you're going? This is your home." Adanna let out a soft chuckle, but there was no humor in it. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes colder than they had ever been. "No," she said simply, "it never was." And then she walked away. Each step felt lighter. With every breath, the weight she had carried for so long, the pain, the expectations, the desperate need to prove her worth, began to fade. Ogbonna moved before he could stop himself. "Adanna!" His voice cracked, raw with fear. He lunged forward, grabbing her wrist, his grip desperate. "Don't go. Please, let's talk. I made a mistake." His voice was shaking now, his entire body trembling with panic. Adanna didn't pull away immediately. Instead, she looked up at him, really looked at him. The man she had loved was standing before her, but he no longer felt like home. He felt like a stranger. "You didn't just make a mistake, Ogbonna." Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of everything she had been through. "You made a choice." A tear slipped down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. His grip on her wrist loosened, and she gently pulled herself free. He wanted to say something, to beg, to promise, to undo what had been done, but she was already walking away. Ogbonna stood there, his breath shallow, his mind screaming. Mama Nkechi stepped forward, her voice laced with irritation. "Let her go, my son. She was never good for you anyway." Ogbonna turned to her slowly. For the first time, he saw his mother for what she was, not his protector, not the woman who wanted the best for him. She had destroyed his marriage, but he had let her. His knees felt weak, his vision blurred as he turned back toward the door, toward the woman he loved. But by the time he reached it, she was already gone. Ogbonna felt the walls closing in around him, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He had never imagined this moment, watching Adanna, the woman who had once looked at him with nothing but love, walk away without a second glance. "Adanna, please!" His voice cracked as he rushed after her, nearly stumbling in his desperation. "Don't do this. We can fix this." She didn't stop. She didn't even turn her head. Ogbonna's heart pounded, a sickening fear clawing at his chest. He had made a mistake so great, so unforgivable, that even his own body felt the weight of it. His mother's voice rang out behind him. "Let her go, my son. She was never right for you anyway." Something inside him snapped. For years, he had listened to Mama Nkechi. He had trusted her judgment, believed that she always had his best interests at heart. But now, standing in the wreckage of his marriage, watching the woman he loved disappear from his life, he finally saw the truth. She had poisoned his mind, manipulated him, and he had let her. Slowly, Obinna turned to face her. Mama Nkechi had always been confident, always held her head high, knowing she controlled her son. But now, she looked uneasy. "You lied to me," Obinna said, his voice dangerously quiet. Mama Nkechi scoffed, flipping her hand dismissively. "I did what any mother would do. That woman was taking you away from me." Obinna clenched his jaw, his fists shaking. "That woman was my wife." Mama Nkechi's face twisted with anger. "And you would choose her over your own mother." The words hit him like a slap. Just hours ago he would have blindly agreed with her, but now all he felt was disgust. "I already did," he whispered, "and I betrayed her." His hands trembled as he ran them through his hair, his mind racing. He had to fix this. He had to make Adanna see that he was sorry, that he could change. Ignoring his mother's protests, he bolted toward the door, yanking it open. The cold night air hit him like a wave, but he didn't care. His eyes darted across the street, searching frantically. "Adanna!" he called, his voice raw, but she was gone. His stomach twisted painfully. He staggered back inside, gripping the doorframe as nausea rolled through him. He had lost her. Panic clawed at his throat. No, this couldn't be real. He had to find her. He had to make things right. "Obinna, stop acting like a fool," Mama Nkechi snapped. "She'll come back. She has no choice." Obinna turned to her, and for the first time in his life, he saw her not as his mother, but as the woman who had ruined everything, and he had let her. "You're wrong," he said hoarsely. "She does have a choice, and she chose to leave me." Mama Nkechi stiffened, her confidence faltering. "She won't survive without you. Where will she go?" Obinna let out a bitter laugh. "Anywhere. Anywhere is better than here." A heavy silence fell between them. Mama Nkechi swallowed hard, for the first time looking truly afraid. She had spent years pulling the strings, controlling Obinna's every move, but in her greed, in her desperation to win, she had lost. And Obinna, he had lost everything. His knees buckled, and he sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. His mind replayed the moment over and over, the sound of his palm striking Adanna's cheek, the look of pure heartbreak in her eyes. He had been her protector, her husband, and he had hurt her in the worst way possible. Now, she was gone, and the regret, it was suffocating. Obinna had never imagined his life without Adanna, but now, as he sat alone in the darkness of their once warm and vibrant home, he realized what true loneliness felt like. The air was cold, the silence unbearable. Adanna was gone, and nothing was the same. At first, he convinced himself she would come back. She had to. She loved him, didn't she? But the days stretched into weeks, and there was no word from her. No calls, no messages, nothing. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. She wasn't coming back. Then, everything else began to crumble. His business, once thriving, started spiraling downward. It was as if his bad karma had seeped into every part of his life. Deals that were once guaranteed began falling through. Clients lost trust in him. Investors backed out. Problems arose where there had never been any before. His once solid foundation was cracking beneath him, and no matter how hard he tried to hold things together, it was slipping through his fingers. His employees whispered when they thought he wasn't listening. They saw the change in him. The man who once walked with pride and certainty now looked hollow, his shoulders heavy with regret. The respect he had commanded was gone. People no longer saw him as a leader, but as a man who had destroyed his own happiness with his own hands. And then, there was his home, cold, empty, lifeless. Adanna's presence had once made it a place of love and warmth, but now, the house felt like a prison. The kitchen, where she used to hum softly as she cooked his favorite meals, was silent. The bed, where he once held her close at night, felt too big, too lonely. He found himself reaching for her in the middle of the night, only to wake up to nothing but the biting emptiness of his mistakes. And Mama Nkechi? She was the only one left. At first, she acted like nothing had changed, like she had won. She cooked his meals, took care of the house, and reminded him that he had done the right thing. "She would have ruined you, my son," she would say, her voice dripping with false reassurance. "You'll see. This is for the best. But Obinna no longer believed her. With each passing day, he saw her for what she really was, a selfish, manipulative woman who had never truly cared about his happiness. She had torn apart his marriage, convinced him to destroy the best thing in his life. And for what? Her own control, her own insecurity. He started resenting the sound of her voice, the way she hovered, pretending to be his savior when she was the reason for his downfall. He couldn't even look at her without feeling sick. One evening, as he sat at the dining table, staring at the untouched plate of food in front of him, Mama Nkechi sighed loudly. "You need to stop sulking," she snapped. "A man like you can find another wife, a better one." Obinna lifted his head slowly, his eyes dark with something unreadable. A better one? His voice was eerily calm. Mama Nkechi hesitated, suddenly feeling uneasy under his gaze. "Yes," she said, forcing confidence into her tone. "One who respects me, who—" "Enough!" His voice cut through the room like a blade. She flinched, unused to this tone from him. "Obinna, you ruined my life," he said, his voice shaking with restrained fury. "And I let you." Mama Nkechi's face paled. "I was protecting you." "From what?" he demanded, his voice rising. "From the woman who loved me? From the only person who ever truly cared about me?" For the first time in his life, he saw fear in her eyes. She had won the battle, but she had lost the war. And now, Obinna was the one looking at her with disgust. As he stood from the table, pushing his untouched plate aside, he knew one thing for certain. Karma was real, and it was coming for them both. Obinna used to believe he was the center of Adanna's world, that no matter what, she would always be there. But as time passed, he realized the brutal truth. She wasn't just surviving without him, she was thriving. Adanna had always been strong, but now she was unstoppable. She had walked away from the life she had built with him, broken and betrayed, but she refused to stay down. Instead, she picked up the shattered pieces of her heart and built something greater than she had ever imagined. At first, it wasn't easy. The pain of his betrayal still lingered, and the memory of his slap haunted her, but she refused to let it define her. She poured her energy into healing, surrounding herself with people who truly valued her, friends who reminded her of her worth, a community that uplifted her, and slowly, the sadness was replaced with something new, power. She started focusing on her career, pushing herself harder than ever before. Every time she felt doubt creeping in, she reminded herself that she had already survived the worst. What was left to fear? Before long, she was soaring. Promotions, new opportunities, a life of success and freedom that she had never known before. She traveled, experienced new things, and most importantly, she smiled again, truly smiled. And then, just when she had thought she had already won, life gave her another gift, love. Not the kind that came with conditions, not the kind that needed her to prove her worth or beg for respect. This time, love found her in its purest form. He wasn't just a man, he was everything Obinna had failed to be. Kind, patient, and unwavering in his admiration for her. He saw her strength, her fire, and instead of trying to control it, he embraced it. He made her feel safe. The way he looked at her was different. It wasn't possessive, it wasn't entitled. It was full of gratitude, as if he knew what a privilege it was to have her in his life. And Adanna, she felt it deep in her soul. This was what love was supposed to feel like. And Obinna, he saw it all. At first, he tried to ignore it, convincing himself it was just temporary, that she would come back. But the more he watched, the more he realized he had lost her forever. He saw the pictures, the way she laughed now, a glow in her eyes that had long since faded when she was with him, the way she walked with confidence, as if she had finally stepped into the woman she was always meant to be. And the worst part? She wasn't just doing well, she was doing better without him. The realization crushed him. The regret was unbearable, a weight that never left his chest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the moment she had walked away, the moment he had let her slip through his fingers. But it was too late now. She had moved on, and for the first time in his life, he understood. A woman who knows her worth never looks back. Obinna sat alone in the house that once felt like home, but now it was nothing more than an empty shell. Silence echoed in the space where laughter used to live. The warmth that Adanna had brought into his life was gone, replaced by a suffocating coldness. He had lost everything, not just his wife, but the light she carried, the love, the devotion, the unwavering support. He had thrown it all away with a single slap, a single moment of blind trust in his mother's lies. And now, There was no way to undo what had been done. Adanna, the woman who had once loved him with her whole heart, had moved on. She was happier than ever, glowing in her new life, while he was left with nothing but his regret. His mother, Mama Nkechi, still lived in the house, but even she could not fill the emptiness. He looked at her now and saw not the caring mother he had once idolized, but the woman who had led him to his downfall. For the first time, he truly saw her for who she was, a manipulator, a destroyer, and he had let her destroy the best thing that had ever happened to him. He had believed her whispers over the woman who had stood by his side through everything. He had let anger cloud his judgment, let blind loyalty cost him his marriage. Now, it was too late. Adanna's last words haunted him. You didn't even ask me before raising your hand. You're not my husband. You're just your mother's puppet. Those words had been a knife to his chest, but he had only realized their full weight after she was gone. And when he saw her again, flourishing, successful, in love with a man who cherished her, he finally understood. A woman who knows her worth never begs to be loved. She doesn't stay where she isn't valued. She doesn't fight for a man who won't fight for her. She walks away. And that's exactly what Adanna did. She left him drowning in his regret, a lesson he would never forget.